The silence at USP Marion didn't begin with a scream or a gunshot, it arrived like a decision already made. In the early 1980s, after a chain of violent incidents rattled the federal prison system, buses rolled through southern Illinois under gray skies, delivering men the Bureau of Prisons considered unmanageable. Marion had a reputation for control, thick walls, narrow corridors, and a culture that prized order over explanation. But on this night, control took on a new shape. Doors slammed. Lights hummed. And something unspoken settled into the air. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. The lockdown came fast and without ceremony. Cells that once opened for work details and meals stayed shut. Voices that carried down tears were met with nothing in return. Meals slid through metal slots. Movement stopped. Conversation vanished. There was no announcement, no memo to the men inside, only the sudden realization that time had flattened into a single, endless day. They called it order. Inside the units, it felt like erasure. Marion had long been described as a pressure cooker, housing leaders of prison gangs, men with life sentences, inmates who had nothing left to lose. After the violence, officials promised Congress and the public that Marion would never lose control again. What followed was not a riot response or a temporary lockdown. It was a program that turned silence into policy. Cells were designed to isolate, but this was different. 24 hours a day alone. No group recreation. No programs. No casual words exchanged with officers. Even eye contact became rare. Guards were instructed to keep interactions minimal. The message was clear: noise was a problem, and silence was the solution. The building itself amplified it. Fluorescent lights flickered without rhythm. Ventilation whispered like static. The clank of a distant door echoed longer than it should have, then disappeared. Men began to measure time by meals, then by shadows, then not at all. Some inmates tried to talk through vents, tapping codes against steel. Others sat on their bunks and stared at concrete until their thoughts began to loop. Without warning or timeline, the isolation pressed inward, quietly, relentlessly, testing how much of a person could be removed before nothing recognizable remained. Official records would later describe Marion as secure and stable. But inside those cells, stability felt like a lie told often enough to become policy. And as days turned into indistinguishable stretches of silence, a question spread through the tiers, never spoken aloud, but understood by everyone listening to the hum of the lights. Was this temporary, or had Marion crossed a line it could never uncross? What made Operation Silent Treatment effective wasn't just the isolation, it was how carefully it was managed behind the scenes. On paper, Marion was calm. Incident reports dropped. Assault numbers fell. To administrators, the data looked like success. But inside the units, control had shifted from physical force to psychological dominance. Guards weren't just enforcing rules anymore, they were enforcing absence. Officers were instructed to speak only when necessary. Orders were short. Neutral. No names. No explanations. Even disciplinary notices were delayed or vague, arriving days late, stripped of context. The uncertainty became part of the punishment. Men didn't know why they were isolated, how long it would last, or what behavior, if any, would end it. Silence stopped being empty. It became heavy. Inmates began to report symptoms that didn't leave marks. Some heard voices that weren't there. Others felt watched even when alone. A few stopped responding altogether, lying on their bunks for hours, conserving energy as if conversation itself had become dangerous. Guards noticed it too. Men who once shouted through doors now flinched at footsteps. Leaders who controlled entire tiers grew quiet, then distant. This wasn't accidental. Former staff would later admit the strategy was deliberate. Silence disoriented. Isolation disrupted gang communication. Routine was broken on purpose. By removing sound, movement, and predictability, Marion wasn't just containing inmates, it was resetting them. Resistance became harder when no one knew who was still resisting. But the pressure ran both ways. Some guards struggled with the order. Walking past hundreds of sealed doors without acknowledging the men inside went against everything they'd been trained to do. Others embraced it. Authority felt absolute in a place where no one talked back. Complaints disappeared because there was no system left to voice them through. What made Operation Silent Treatment nearly invisible was its lack of a name. It didn't appear in handbooks or official program lists. There were no public announcements, no press briefings. To the outside world, Marion was simply on extended lockdown. Inside, inmates understood something else was happening, something experimental. Letters sent home grew erratic. Some stopped entirely. Families noticed changes when they finally heard from loved ones: flat tone, broken sentences, long pauses written into the page. Attorneys raised concerns, but access was limited, tightly scheduled, and closely monitored. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A handful of internal memos surfaced, never meant for public release, framing the silence not as a response, but as a model. Marion, the documents suggested, was becoming a testing ground. A place to see how much control could be achieved without force. How far isolation could go before it broke something permanent. And for the first time, it became clear this wasn't a temporary measure. It was a blueprint. By the time outsiders began to understand what was happening at Marion, the silence had already done its work. Men who entered the program angry and defiant emerged hollowed out. Some struggled to form sentences. Others avoided eye contact, their emotions flattened into something unreadable. A few never fully recovered. Psychologists who later reviewed records described symptoms consistent with long-term sensory deprivation, paranoia, memory loss, and inability to tolerate normal human interaction. But inside the Bureau of Prisons, the results were framed differently. Violence stayed low. Gangs lost coordination. Marion remained quiet. To policymakers under pressure to control a growing federal prison population, the numbers mattered more than the cost. What had started as a response quietly became a doctrine: total control through total isolation. There were no trials. No formal admissions of harm. Just gradual normalization. Marion never returned to its previous operations. Instead, it became something else entirely, the first federal prison to exist in a permanent state of lockdown. Other facilities took notes. Designs changed. New prisons were built with isolation at their core. Concrete boxes. Remote locations. Limited human contact by default. Years later, those ideas would reappear under a new name: Supermax. ADX Florence. Pelican Bay. Facilities designed not just to hold inmates, but to manage them through deprivation. Officials cited Marion as proof that silence worked. That order could be engineered. That the mind, like the body, could be confined. Operation Silent Treatment itself faded from public discussion. It remained buried in policy language and internal reports, rarely mentioned, never fully acknowledged. For the men who lived through it, there was no official reckoning, only the long process of relearning how to exist in a world with sound. Marion still stands today, its corridors quieter than most prisons, its legacy written into every supermax cell in America. What happened there reshaped punishment without ever asking whether it should. Because the most effective control didn't require violence. It required silence. And once the system learned that lesson, it never forgot it. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.